The story of Monkey Island takes us back to 1988, when Ron Gilbert, the creator of Zack McCracken and Maniac Mansion, had the idea for a pirate adventure game. He first wrote story ideas about pirates while spending the weekend at a friend's house. His initial story featured unnamed villains that would eventually become LeChuck and Elaine. Guybrush, the eventual main character of the series, was still to be conceived. He pitched it to Lucasfilm Games' staff as a series of short stories. Gilbert's idea was warmly received, but production was postponed because Lucas Games had assigned its designers, including Gilbert, to Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. Development of The Last Crusade was finished in 1989, which allowed Gilbert to begin production of The Secret of Monkey Island, then known internally under the working title Mutiny on Monkey Island. Gilbert soon realized that it would be difficult to design the game by himself. He decided to join forces with Tim Schafer and Dave Grossman, both of whom he hired for Lucas Games. The game's insult sword fighting mechanics were influenced by swashbuckling movies starring Errol Flynn, which the designers often watched for inspiration. They noticed that pirates in those films often taunted their opponents instead of attacking them, which gave the team the idea to base the game's duels on insults rather than combat. Writer Orson Card helped them compose the insults during a visit to Lucasfilm's headquarters at Skywalker Ranch. Many of Gilbert's original gameplay ideas were abandoned during the production process, although he stated that most of that stuff was left out for a reason. The game's plot, as described by Dave Grossman, it's a story about this young man who comes to an island in search of his life's dream. He's pursuing his career goals, and he discovers love in the process and winds up thinking that was actually more important than what he was doing to begin with. You're laughing, but there's actually something deeper going on as well. When work on the plot began, Gilbert discovered that Schafer's and Grossman's writing styles were too different to form a cohesive whole. Grossman's was very kind of a dry, sarcastic humor, and Schafer's was just a little more in your face. In reaction, Gilbert assigned them to different characters and story moments, depending on what type of comedy was required. Grossman believed that this benefited the game's writing, as he and Schafer were all funny in slightly different ways, and it worked well together. Most of the dialogue was written while programming the game. As a result, much of it was improvised. Some of the dialogue was based on the designer's personal experiences, such as Guybrush's line, "I had a feeling in hell there would be mushrooms," which came from Schafer's own hatred of fungi. The game's world and characters were designed primarily by Gilbert. After having read Tim Power's historical fantasy novel On Stranger Tides, he decided to add paranormal themes to the game's plot. He also cited Power's book as an influence on the characters, particularly those of Guybrush and LeChuck. Inspiration for the game's ambience came from Gilbert's favorite childhood amusement park ride, Pirates of the Caribbean. Grossman said that Gilbert always wanted to step off the ride and talk to the people who lived in that world. Near the final stages of the design work, Gilbert introduced several characters who were not directly related to the game's story. He considered this to be an important decision, as the player would need those seemingly minor characters in later parts of the game and would receive a chance to really interact with them. Gilbert, Schafer and Grossman's primary goal was to create a simpler and more accessible gameplay model than those presented in previous Lucasfilm titles. Gilbert had conceived the main designs and puzzles before production began, which resulted in the bulk of the designer's work to flesh out his ideas. He was frustrated by the adventure games that Sierra Online was releasing at the time, and later said that you died any time you did anything wrong. Gilbert considered such gameplay as a cheap way out for the designer. He had previously applied his design ideas to the 1987 graphic adventure title Maniac Mansion, but considered he committed a number of mistakes during development, such as dead-end situations that prevented the player from completing the game, and poorly implemented triggers for cutscenes. Gilbert aimed to avoid such errors in The Secret of Monkey Island. The team decided to make it impossible for the player character to die, with one notable exception, which focused gameplay primarily on world exploration. The Sierra game over screen was parodied, when Guybrush falls off a cliff only to be bounced back up by a rubber tree. Guybrush can also be killed by drowning, though it is an Easter egg unlikely to be found without looking for it. The game's pirate reggae music was composed by Lucasfilm Games in-house musician Michael Land in MIDI format. It was his first project at the company. The theme has become one of the defining elements of the game, helping to make Monkey Island an all-time classic. The Secret of Monkey Island ultimately cost $200,000 to produce and was developed over 9 months. The game received positive reviews from critics. According to Gilbert, it sold well, but was never a big hit. Grossman later summarized that the game's sales were north of 100,000, far south of 1 million. Back in those days, a few 100,000 was considered a giant smash hit. Amiga Action wrote that the attention to detail and the finely tuned gameplay cannot be faulted. They called the graphics stunning throughout, and believed that, when they were combined with the excellent Caribbean tunes, the result is a game filled with character and atmosphere. According to Next Generation, The Secret of Monkey Island was a relatively minor hit in the United States, but the game and its sequel became blockbusters on the PC and the Amiga throughout Europe. The Secret of Monkey Island would come to define a genre and set a new standard for the adventure game industry. LucasArts would go on to gain a reputation for creating truly engaging and imaginative point-and-click titles, including The Dig and Full Throttle. The game has come to be seen as an adventure game classic and features in many all-time greatest game lists. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. If you want more content, check out our Patreon.